course, we had all the training set up and we had all this done. And then NVAR on Monday contacts us and say, guess what? We're making changes to most of the forms. So we started looking at those, on Monday night. We did a class yesterday in Tyson's and kind of went through them the first time too. And so I'm glad to be here with you guys. So
and thanks to Rolf and Todd.
Yeah, Rolf and Todd did a great job
Todd and Tyson's.
yesterday. So the plan for today is what we're trying to do is hit the high points of some of what we're seeing with the new changes. We'll talk about what went into effect here basically a month ago, and then the changes that they made to the forms basically 2 days ago. So those that don't know, I think everybody in here is probably a Northern Virginia member. So the NVAR site is a wealth of knowledge, and so I would say always please go on that site a lot and look, because just like right here, you can see that form changes August 14th. These are going into effect August 14th, and so if you go down through here, Maria Flax, who most of us know, put together sort of a nice little summary of everything here, and basically says that as a direct response to the member suggestions and the consultation with industry partners, that's why they decided to make these changes. So those that's been around a long time basically knows usually they do changes in the beginning of the year and then sort of right at the mid-year. So this is...
And what they pride themselves on, amidst a bunch of criticism, with changes and stuff, they like us to believe and want us to appreciate that they're nimble, that they can listen to the membership. That's what they've been trying to do. That's why these last minute changes here that they just published, it's a result of feedback. They tried to get it right. They always try to get it right on the first go round. And we've got a lot of Samson agents who are volunteers over there, not just NVAR, but other local associations, including some on the Standard Forms Committee. It's not an easy task. So they do the best they can, and they made these changes based on feedback from our fellow membership realtors, as well as some other industry pros, attorneys, lenders, et cetera.
Yeah, so I think that more now than ever, it's always been important to pay attention, take education, listen to everything from, the sales meetings to Donnie's Friday updates to all the training that we do here, as well as listen to the boards, listen to NVAR, listen to VAR, because, I think with all the changes that's going on, we're going to see more changes throughout the year and even into next year. So it's important that we stay, very nimble. The examples of, what I love about Samson is that we give all the education. And I started telling Mike last night that I got a contract on one of my listings, and the contract was like 4 versions ago they were using. And I'm like, no, we got to do this. And they're like, well, we don't have the updates. And I'm like, okay, that's not really an excuse. It's like, let's get the update and do the right contract. So, but yeah, so let's jump right in here a little bit. So I would say, don't be nervous about this. It's, we're going to get everybody through it, and it's really not that hard. It's just we're just trying to wrap our head around the change a little bit. So you can see that what they've done in this summary on NVAR, and I would tell everybody to go there and check it out, is that, hey, on the exclusive right to represent, they reformatted for clarity, they removed some verbiage, and we're going to go through each one of these forms, so I don't want to run through each one of this now.
These highlights, by the way, were made by me, not by NVAR.
Yeah.
Sometimes I over-highlight, but...
and we'll notice on some of the forms here, it's like Mike's made lots of little notes, so it's he's great at looking at forms. But you can see what they've done. They've made quite a few changes to the exclusive right to sell agreement, and that includes some of the land and other contracts as well that we'll go through. They've added a new form, which is called the listing agreement amendment form, and then that's about it. So easy as that, right? So let's jump down through here. So, okay.
So we're looking at the buyer agency agreement first?
So Justin, so within your packages, you have a few more forms than we're going to have on the screen. But on the screen, what we're going to try to show is just really the highlights of each one of the sections. So within here, this is the exclusive right to represent a buyer agreement. And so this is paragraph 8, if you can jump to that part. And so, this is where it talks about that the buyer's broker compensation, buyer will pay broker an amount of, and it's a percentage or a dollar amount. If buyer enters into a contract to acquire any real property during the term of the agreement and goes to settlement on the contract anytime thereafter. Now, check out the part that's been sort of highlighted here a little bit by Mike, is buyer is responsible for payment of broker compensation at settlement. If broker receives any compensation from seller or seller's representative for services covered by agreement, that amount will be credited toward buyer's obligation to pay the broker compensation.
I highlighted that simply to remind everybody that that's not new. That language is not new. It's been in there for years, okay? And you'll see a rather significant change next that they've just made to be effective August 14th. But the fundamental basis of all of this is the responsibility for payment under the brokerage agreement, as everybody should know, is based on the relationship and the agreement with our own buyer-client. So our buyer's responsible unless or to the extent that we end up negotiating commission from the seller, which is usually the case historically, right? Almost all the time. Remains to be seen how the landscape's really going to change or evolve in the coming months and year or so, whether you're going to start to see more and more listing agents and sellers putting properties on the market without any open indication of compensation, or in some cases, sellers flat out saying, for now at least, I'm not paying. I'm not paying. I don't think we're going to see a lot of that, and certainly it can depend on the market. If it continues to move little by little back towards a more normal market, which is, we haven't been in a normal market, right? For like 7 years. We've been in a raging seller's market. Longest protracted seller's market that I think either Dave or I can recall in a lot of years. So that has been the underlying cause of all of our problems, because it has resulted in lack of inventory, continuing lack of inventory, right? And so when you have that, you have sellers feeling more and more confident, and especially now with this NAR settlement and what they're hearing in the news, some of them think they're going to roll the dice and at least try and see how many offers they can get without agreeing to pay any buyer broker compensation. So we all got to hold on tight, be the best realtor we can be as the listing agent and as the buyer agent to advise our clients.
No, exactly, and one of the things to think ahead about the right to represent buyer agreement, because in the way we've done it in the past, you've got that signed, you send it to your broker for signature, and hopefully you've returned it back to the client with the broker signature on it, and that's basically it. Well, the new norm of this is that there's a good chance you're going to have to send that to the title company, to Cardinal Title, and then also possibly even the lender. Because if you think about it, and when we get to the sales contract, if there's the seller paid compensation on there, but there's also a place for seller subsidy. So where maybe the seller's not willing to pay the compensation, but they're willing to give X amount of percent or X amount of dollars or whatever
to the buyer.
Toward the buyer to closing costs. Well, then you're going to have to show your buyer agreement to show, hey, we get all of that or part of that. So don't be alarmed when the title companies or when the lenders are going to start calling and asking for this. And one of the things I've talked to 2 different mortgage companies, and including Jerry and some other ones, and they are going to be making sure that it's signed by all parties and the broker. So, be real careful on that before you send it over. Make sure that, we all know that, we're supposed to be getting these up front, and, as soon as you get it, pop it over to, myself or Steve or, ever who your office manager is, and we're more than happy to take a look at that and try to get it signed quickly for you.
Right.
Is there any questions on because this is the main thing on the right to represent, correct?
So before we take questions, let me just say on the buyer, so again, this is based on the July 1 revision, which was, pretty considerable change over what we had last year, and now it's a new change. What I want to share with you, those that are familiar with the one that came out in July, what they took out, and this is, in this packet that is on NVAR, right? They explain what they took out there. They removed the authorization language for a broker to request a specific amount of compensation in offers to a seller, as it no longer applies in the current marketplace after developments in the industry that addressed fair housing concerns. You know, I'll kind of leave it up to you all to muddle over what's the true meaning of that. That's a pretty bizarre statement right there. But the point being, in the document itself, they took out what used to be there. I have a red line version here that shows, that came from NVAR, that shows what was deleted. And, you know, not sure if some of you may have already used that buyer agency agreement since July 1, where you had your buyer check a box that said, buyer will request seller contribution to buyer compensation in the amount of X% of the gross sales price or flat dollar amount in offers to purchase the property. Buyer understands that seller contribution is negotiable and will ultimately be determined by a qualified sales contract between buyer and seller. That was removed. So there's, doesn't mean that the buyer isn't gonna most often, very often, ask you to write up their offer with paragraph 2E on the sales contract filled in, seller paid buyer broker compensation, because that is, in my estimation, what we're going to see. The vast majority of times, it's in keeping with what we've always done, that the buyer broker commission, as well as all other costs of sale, the seller side, listing commission, seller's closing costs, and certainly the buyer broker commission is financed into the transaction. It's all funded by the buyer, right? Always has been. It's the buyer's down payment and the loan amount, which equals that ultimate ratified contract that gets accepted, that generates the proceeds of the sale, which covers costs of sale for the seller. So it's on the seller side, always has been, seller side column of the ALTA, that it's paid from the seller's proceeds, but you know, it's really always has been pretty much, and will continue to be, in my opinion, vast majority of the times, it's funded by the buyer, and so the buyer is going to usually ask us to write it into the offer, right? Rather than coming out of pocket themselves to pay us directly, which they can certainly do. But Dave was talking about the subsidy, and we're going to get to that, I think, in the listing agreement and the sales contract. But he said that the subsidy is an alternative way, if you have that agreement with your buyer, that if you write an offer on a property and ultimately the seller's saying, I'm not paying any buyer broker commission, or if you're in a competing bid situation or whatever, and you know, maybe there's a situation where the seller will pay X amount in subsidy to the buyer, that's okay, as long as the buyer understands that there's going to be a charge to the buyer on the ALTA, on the buyer side, right? There would be a seller subsidy to the buyer, because subsidies are seller to buyer. Seller paid buyer broker commission is a seller paid to us, to broker. But if it's a subsidy, it'd be a credit to the buyer, like always, and then there would be a line item payment of commission from the buyer to us, okay?
Yeah, and there's different ways to structure, and you know, we'll probably have future classes on that too, that, you know, just like if you raise the sales price a little bit, they get the subsidy in, but you know, keep in mind then it has to appraise, and you know, there's a lot of different ways to structure it. But before we get to questions though, I did just want to bring up on the buyer portion here as to where, you know, please take an extra 2 minutes and fill in the entire contract. Make sure that the boxes are checked. You know, just like on here, it's like, are you taking a percentage or are you taking a dollar amount? And so if it's a percentage, make sure that you've checked the box before the percentage. And then also remember the new rules. You know, we're all Samson here, so we can talk commission. And so, you know, if you put 3% in that block and the seller offers 4%, how much are we getting? There you go. Yeah. So be very careful, you know, when we're doing stuff like this. And
yeah, can you scroll down to
yep.
a little bit to B?
Yep. We don't have B. Hang on a second.
He don't have it?
Yeah, hang on a second. Justin, pop the screen up there for a second, and then we can practice up. So, yeah, I can get it. Let's see here.
It's not a big deal. I can just reference it. On the next page of the buyer agency agreement, so it would be page 3. It's subparagraph E, and it's, I'm just a reminder, this is not new, but it was new as of July 1, where it says retention of excess compensation.
Right here it is, guys.
Yeah, there's E right there. Broker may not receive any compensation, including fees, which exceeds the amounts set forth in this agreement. So they moved that. That previously was further up in the document. It's still there, and just in the context of the compensation and how you might be going back, talking to the buyer about what to negotiate. But if you come across a listing that they're saying, maybe the market's cooling a little bit in that neighborhood, and they're starting to up their commission or offer a bonus or whatever it is, and you become aware of that, well, you got to go back to your buyer. If you're looking to get anything that's higher than what you had put in your document, that's going to have to be amended in writing.
So we can't amend it before sending off legal?
And there's some people.
Repeat.
Oh, I'm sorry. Who's got a microphone? Thanks. Thank you.
Can you hear me? I don't know. I can't hear myself.
Yes. Yeah, no.
It's good. It's good.
Okay. I was just asking that in the case where the compensation is higher than what we've originally agreed before presenting the offer, can we go back and have a discussion with our buyer and amend that agreement to the higher amount? And Mike said yes.
My take on that, and we had this discussion with Sarah Mormon and Dave and a bunch of our managing brokers recently. Even though, despite what you might hear from some circles, and including what the DOJ might suggest on this front about renegotiating stuff, we're always going to be able to agree with our own client on our compensation. So the answer is absolutely yes. If you want to, and you should get that in writing before you make an offer, as soon as you become aware. If they want to buy a property that is offering out, there's an indication one way or another, listing agent flat out tells you, or however you find out about the compensation. And if it's more than what you had in your buyer broker agreement, get it in writing before you submit your offer for sure. But that speaks to, don't shortchange yourself, please. In your buyer broker agreements, you're going to find out the hard way sometimes. If you put a lower amount, if you're putting 1.5% or 2% or whatever you're putting in, you better be prepared to live with that. What I'm saying is I would recommend you shoot for the moon and land a star if you need to, right?
And you can always have that conversation with your buyer too. In other words, say, here's how we get paid. Here's what I charge, and you can put, let's just use 3% or 4% or whatever it is in there. But you can have the understanding with them too that, look, if we can only get 2%, I'm good with 2. Anything less than 2, we're going to have to make up the difference. So there's good questions with that.
And people have asked us if that could be memorialized in the document itself. I believe the answer is yes. In other words, could you say something if this made the buyer more comfortable, and it facilitated getting their signature on the buyer broker agreement? There's nothing that says we couldn't say our fee is 3% or whatever it is. In the event, though, however, in the event that the buyer wants to pursue a property that the seller, it can't be negotiated to be paid out of the sales proceeds, out of the contract, paid by the seller, then agent and Samson Properties will agree to a minimum of X. Mm-hmm. So that could be built in. Yeah.
John.
Just a quick thought regarding paragraph 8A, the percentage, and where it states buyer will pay. What are your thoughts on striking buyer in writing in seller?
Yeah. That doesn't work, in my opinion, Johnny. But what I would, and I'll try to explain why, but always remind the buyer of what is in bold, couple lines down. If broker receives any compensation from seller or seller's representative for services covered by agreement, that amount will be credited towards buyer's obligation to pay. I know that doesn't necessarily, do it for every buyer. You're probably talking about scenarios where a buyer says, I'm not agreeing to pay you anything, but I am agreeing to, I want you to facilitate my, my successful purchase and negotiate your commission in the contract to be paid by the seller. Is that pretty much what you're, yeah. What do you think? I mean, as long as it's crystal clear that we are working for X, but I mean, so I suppose it could be okay if it further is clear that if you can't negotiate it, you're getting zero, or what? The buyer is, you're going to have a come to Jesus and say, are we going to go find a different property? Are you going to work for free? In the rare case that, we'll see how rare that is. We certainly hope that doesn't become any more common than necessary, but we can talk further about it offline.
So you're agreeing that it's okay?
Well, as long as, so are you saying to your buyer that if you can't get anything, that you're going to still move forward and work for nothing for them?
It's going to be a conversation. If
it's written in the additional terms, that's the clear understanding between you and the buyer that in such a case, you'll work for free, then I think that needs to be in the agreement.
Yeah, and keep in mind that the agreement's between you and the buyer, not the seller. So, yeah, it's a buyer-broker agreement. So, yeah. So if you think about, going back in time where a lot of us would put per MLS or whatever that is, which those were never really valid because it needed to be a percentage or a dollar figure. Yeah. And so, we see the other side of that too. And where, I can tell Mike's cringing up here just like me because, we get that call from you guys that's like, man, I'm not getting commission, or I didn't get paid, or they went and bought a house without me, or whatever it might be. And I've got procuring cause. And one of the first things we do is we say, hey, what does your right to represent look like? And we get the right to represent, and it's like it shows zero, or they don't have one. And, and as much as we love you and we want to help you, there's not a lot of ground to stand on in those cases.
So I had a question.
Oh, hang on, you need the mic. Oh, you got it. Okay, I'm sorry. Yeah, you're good.
My question is for the amount where it says, the broker, an amount of or whatever, I think what section A, is it okay to make it like a range, like a minimum of to a maximum?
Not in that section. That section, like we spoke before, is you should put the maximum amount. So you should put the 3 or the 4 or 3.5 or whatever it is. And then just like Mike was explaining, if you go down into the other terms, that's where you can put that, in other words, we'll have a minimum of 2%.
Okay, thank you.
Along the same line, since it seems to be the crux of the entire conflict here is who's paying who, can it not be worded that the broker would solicit compensation from the seller and accept what is being paid, but in no case shall it be below 2%, and at that level that buyer would be responsible for it? Can't there be a phrase that would encompass both sides of the question?
I believe that's what we're talking about. Yeah. You can create something. I don't have any problem with you creating something like that in the additional terms as long as it's clear. And if you ever want to run that by one of us in a real world scenario, feel free. Again, we're entitled to work with our buyers under the terms of engagement that we want to work. We don't have to work for anything less than we don't want to work for. But we need to be super clear with them what's the maximum that they could be responsible for.
Yeah, and keep in mind that when you're looking at the maximum commission, if some of you guys work with new home builders, and you've sold 3 or 4 or 5 homes, and so I know some of those offer like a bonus. So hey, on your fourth sale, maybe they give you an extra $10,000. Well, guess what? If it's above the amount you have in there, you're going to live by what's in the agreement.
So don't forget that if you sell a lot of new homes, especially when we start seeing more bonuses, you don't want to forget that when you're doing a buyer agency agreement, and it's going to be that fourth deal or whatever. You got to plan for that.
Exactly. We'll do one more question. We'll get moving. So I'm just looking at time, please.
Sorry. Yeah. So it's going back to what he had mentioned about adapting verbiage. Mm-hmm. The old contract and the provisions, I used to always use that to justify any compensation above what I had agreed with my buyers. Mm-hmm. So say I did 2%, but in the MLS at the time it was allowed, they would have 2.5 or 3 or whatever. And the provisions I would put per paragraph 8B under compensation, it would be paid, at MLS, something of that sort.
It can't be vague like that, but
Right, no. Now it can't, but right. I was asking, kind of like what they were asking, is provision still there? And can we put something in there stating that per the paragraph, compensation.
Not that we're taking more. Not that we're taking more. So that's why you want to.
Okay.
So in other words, we're playing a very fine line here.
I was going to say per compensation of the contract.
Start with
the
higher amount.
Conference.
Yeah.
Just
start with the higher. Yeah. Start with the higher amount, and then in the additional terms in there, that's where you can spell out that. Look, even though I put in 10% or 5% or whatever the number is, that that we will work with you, and it's like, but we need a minimum compensation of 2% to
right.
work.
But be aware if you do that. I mean, this is just me, and each case is different. Maybe that's your only alternative. That's the challenge for you to find out. Don't put your cards on the table unnecessarily, right? Because as soon as you say something like that, there's a real good chance that a lot of buyers are going to say, I want the difference. Or, you know what I mean? You're really willing to work for this. Well, then that's what I want you to work for. And I want to benefit from the difference. So it can be tricky.
Okay.
But, yep.
So just one more thing, and then we'll move on to the next form. I just want to make on paragraph C is where the broker service fee goes. So that's where if you're charging the customer for that, that's where the $395 goes. And it's only $395. If you've got an additional fee or whatever you put in there, it's got to go into different paragraphs. We can only put the broker service fee at $395. Samson's very consistent across the board. Okay, we good? All right.
Listing agreement. Yes?
Let's go into listing agreement. Let's see here. Looking at Justin's folder. It was the first folder, right? Yeah. Okay. So, exclusive right to sell. Okay. So, would you like to talk about the term and the listing terms? The real important now is to pay close attention to, there's different terms, right? It's like it's different to be, what is the listing term? What is the agreement term? What is the sign term? When was it ratified? So it's real important to pay attention to dates and terminology now. That
is new as of July 1. That's not new for now or for August 14th. But so there's no change in the agreement term and listing term language in this document that you're looking at versus the July 1. But yep, as Dave said, the agreement term is the total. You want this thing signed on the earliest possible date, right? You want to get it signed today, get it inked, even though it's obvious between you and the seller that you're not going to be ready for prime time in any status for another couple of days or weeks or whatever. And the definition of the listing term is that it begins when the seller instructs the broker to allow any potential buyers to learn of the property. And so that's an interesting kind of wide open thing. And then listing terms shall go into effect on or before blank. the listing needs to go into MLS within 2 calendar days of the start of the listing term. That's whether it is coming soon, well, office exclusive, coming soon, or active. Any of those scenarios, it's got to go in, enter it in as a listing into MLS within 2 days of that date. And that listing term date, again, is the date upon which you and or the seller, really, you can't really control what the seller does, but when you and the seller are in any way actively letting the world know that this listing is coming, okay? You're not in coming soon yet, no sign in the ground, you're talking, you've got your listing agreement signed, and you're strategizing, you're planning with your seller, but as soon as you start talking about it, as soon as the seller starts talking about it with neighbors and such, I mean, that's them, but the idea is as soon as any buyers are going to learn about the property, and you can, certainly as soon as you start advertising or doing any social media, or let alone showing the property, obviously within 2 days then it goes in MLS. So anybody, any question on listing term? Okay.
Yeah, you're gonna see that later when we start looking at some of the other forms here. All right. So, listing broker compensation, paragraph A, and I'm just going to read the first paragraph. Seller will pay broker compensation. Once again, it's either going to be a percentage or a flat fee or a percentage of the gross price plus a flat fee. If during the term of the agreement, anyone produces a buyer ready, willing, and able to buy a property. Now, this is just for the listing side. So if you're taking the listing, this is going to be for your fee for listing. What we're seeing, and people are making a mistake now, is that let's say they're taking a 5% total listing, 2.5 and 2.5. So if you're taking like a 5% listing, you don't put 5% in there. Remember before we had always put the total compensation there, then you'd put the offered compensation down below. So this is very much just yours. So let's say you are taking, let's just say we're taking a 6% listing and we're offering 2.5 out, you would put 3.5% there. Is that all sort of, is that clear, or does anybody have any questions on that? Because we're seeing that a lot.
There is no total commission line. It's broken out. And each of these highlights here, if you see them. And again, this part is not new either since July 1. It's the same as what rolled out July 1.
Yeah, we're just trying to, we wanted to highlight it since we were talking about all the commissions and things.
Just for what it's worth, real quick on the rental listing agreement so that you know, the NAR settlement does not apply technically to the rentals, even though Bright has chosen to take out commission out of MLS on rental listings. But the listing agreement itself, the NVAR listing agreement, that, as compared with this, the rental listing still has a total commission, and out of that, an amount paid to tenant rep brokers. So that's really unchanged.
Must be a commercial break, sponsored by Cardinal Title. Use Cardinal Title. Go ahead, sing the Cardinal song. What is it? We have a little jingle. There you go.
We're working on that marketing.
Our media people know that better than me.
It's good stuff. All right, so like I said, so looking at the lister broker compensation, it's important to fill that out. Let's just go through this sort of quickly. B would be the additional listing brokerage compensation for an unrepresented buyer. So
don't forget that one.
Don't forget it.
Don't gloss over that.
Yep. You
sell your own listing yourself, you better have something in there, right? So.
Yeah. So what are you going to work for? Because we all know that I think we're probably going to see even more of that now coming to us because they're going to think that they're getting a deal. But you as the listing agent, I know that each one of us has done it. Lynn's done it. We've all been there as to where it almost is more work than if there would have been a buyer broker on the other side. So yeah. So like I said, don't shortchange yourself. Once again, put the numbers in there. You could always negotiate, later on with your seller.
So we have a quick question.
Yep. Question.
How about if the seller have agreed to not to do dual representation? You still fill this part?
So it says unrepresented buyer. So it's not a dual agency situation. And just my 20 or 30 second spin on that topic, when you sell your own listing, it does not automatically mean you're going to do dual agency, and you shouldn't. Please do not. When you sell your own listing, it's a beautiful thing. Some agents never want to sell their own listing because they feel like they have this inherent conflict that they can't get their head around, or they don't want to even be in that spot. But in my opinion, it's your job to sell the listing. So if you get an unrepresented buyer, if you want to refer it to me or Dave or another colleague, you can do that, but it's your job to sell your listing. So sell it to, working with the buyer as an unrepresented customer, not a client. Dual agency isn't even really covered under this. If you were to sell your own listing under dual agency, it would be covered under the listing broker, I believe. Or, well, I'm sorry, it would be listing broker plus seller paid buyer broker.
Right.
I mean, but that one additional listing broker compensation is only for unrepresented buyer, not dual agency. Otherwise, it would say that, okay?
And just as clarification, there's a one-page form that everybody would sign that would say that, you know, that you are representing the seller and the buyer is basically unrepresented. Right. So, and that's a whole other class. And I've actually done some training on that too that might still be in the university. I don't know, we might need to update it.
We're probably going to see more. We are already seeing an increase in unrepresented buyers. I think that's a trend that will probably continue. So y'all are going to need to be thinking about polishing your skills, thinking on your feet, how to deal with these people when they come into your open house. But they know that they don't have an agent. They know they're unrepresented. And by and large, a lot of them are coming in with a predetermined, they're devaluing representation. They think that they don't really need it, and they usually expect to get something out of the transaction as a result, whether it's commission, credit, that would otherwise go to their agent, or reduction off the sales price. You know, it's a strategy usually. So,
yeah, it is. And then just touching on the same thing with the listing broker service fee, paragraph D, it's $395 that would go in there, and that's for the Samson. And if you don't put it in there, once again, it's not going to get charged, and then it's going to come off you when they process the commission. So,
and unrepresented buyers too, please remember that we look to an unrepresented customer for the $395 brokerage service fee as well. It has nothing to do with representation. It's not a representation or agency fee. It's a fee for services provided. And anytime you sell your own listing to an unrepresented customer, you're definitely providing, and the company is providing, valuable services to that unrepresented customer. Don't let anybody tell you you're not. But we don't want any of our agents to get caught surprised and disappointed when our accounting office deducts that additional $395 from the commission. And the title company, Cardinal Title, and a lot of title companies will not enter the $395 on the buyer side, unrepresented buyer side, unless you all have an agreement. Remember, with an unrepresented party, you have the disclosure brokerage relationship for unrepresented party form that they sign, but we also have that brokerage service fee explained document, Samson Properties in-house form, brokerage service fee explained. It's designed to get the signature of a client, any client, buyer, seller, client, or an unrepresented buyer or an unrepresented seller, FSBO. And so that's needed so that the title company can feel comfortable putting it on the ALTA to charge it to them, and so that it doesn't get deducted from your commission unexpectedly.
And then I just want to touch on, because we're probably going to see some more of this, and retainer fee. We really didn't talk about this on the right to represent, but it's also on that document. But broker acknowledges receipt of retainer fee. So, you know, some of you may start charging like a retainer fee up front, whether it's on the listing or the buyer side. Just remember that that fee has to be paid to Samson Properties, and it still goes through our accounting department.
We have a form that is available in the Nest library, and I believe it's also in SkySlope. It can be used for a seller, listing side retainer, landlord, rental listing retainer, buyer or tenant. Okay, so it's multi-purpose form. Just be aware of it.
Okay. So if we jump down to number 7, it's the optional seller paid buyer broker compensation. So I'd like, if everybody's got it in front of there, just to read through it a little bit. But, basically what this is saying, and this is kind of what even Johnny G back there was saying a few minutes ago on the other side, that the seller has the option to agree to pay some or all of the fees of the buyer broker in this transaction, which will be payable upon settlement. Seller has no obligation to pay buyer broker compensation. I think we've seen that on all the forms where that's underlighted, it's highlighted. I think if NVAR can make it flash, they probably would, but it's all over there. And so I'll step sideways just a second to talk about the education side of this. And what I would say is that work on filling these forms out. Practice just like we do. I don't care if you're a brand new agent or if you're somebody like myself, or we've been over 30 years. It's like we still role play this, and so. Go ahead and fill this out and go up to Mike or go up to Sam or go up to somebody and say, hey, pretend to be the seller, and walk through this, because you've got to be comfortable when you're presenting these documents. And if your voice is going up and down and, oh my God, they're talking about the NAR and all of this, you've lost. But if you just have a conversation with them that's like, look, it's always been optional. This is nothing new. It's always been optional. And this is what we do as we go on. And I use terms like, all I can tell you is that if I were selling my house today, this is what I would do. And it was so funny, that one line, we were talking to Sam, it was like that one line, my last 3 listings are like, then why wouldn't I do it? I'm like, exactly. Fill it in and you keep going on. Is there an ice maker? It's like, I think the more we dwell on this and the more that we try to explain it and the more that we talk, the more that we're going to get tongue-tied.
But there's no doubt that some people out there seem to be brainwashed by certain media that there's this new law of the land that sellers can't pay buyer broker commissions. It's totally ludicrous. It's outrageous. So you want to make sure they're clear on that. And this really doesn't have anything to do with license law at all or law per se, other than it deals with realtor member licensees, members of NAR, and members of realtor member-owned MLSs, which is the vast majority of the MLSs, Realtor Association owned. So, but again, it's opening up. It's always worked very, very effectively to help produce the broadest pool of qualified buyers and/or renters if it's a rental listing, and the biggest pool of qualified buyers is almost automatically going to generate the most competition, which is good for the seller, right? So, and again, it's the buyer that funds all the money out of a transaction, and so.
Yeah, and if you could talk to that, I think that explains a lot. I want to touch on paragraph B. The disclosure is that does the seller authorize or does not authorize the broker to disclose to prospective buyers?
This is new.
Yep, this is brand new. To buyers and brokers representing buyers of sellers' willingness to negotiate with buyer regarding seller's payment of, in whole or in part, the buyer broker compensation. So there's a lot being said there.
On mine, I didn't underline it there, but I think some key words: seller's willingness to negotiate. So they are, if you remember, those of you that are familiar with the listing agreement that came out July 1, there was language that said what the seller was agreeing to. Seller in the document here was agreeing to authorize us to promote, and that they were agreeing to pay X percent or a flat amount. That was deleted completely. So the big change, the single biggest change with this document is they deleted that language, and they've come up with an addendum now, which we're going to talk about. Yeah, there's a listing agreement addendum. That's item C there, seller approval of optional buyer's broker compensation. That's by way of an addendum. But let's finish up with B.
Yeah, let's finish up with B. So, and then it kind of does roll into C on that. But let's just talk on that just for just a second, right? It's like even if if I'm selling Mr. Briggs' home here, and he says, hey, go offer everybody 3% because he's very generous, and go offer 3%.
I want to sell my house.
He wants to sell his house, and so that's great. Well, I'm just going to put these questions out to everybody. Can you put that in MLS anywhere? No. Correct. You can't do, hey, I'm selling his house for $1,003, right? No. Can't have 3 pillows on the couch, correct? All that kind of stuff. And you laugh, but we're going to see it. And
no hyperlink from your agent remarks.
No hyperlink.
Nothing in showing time.
Yep. So that was the next question. So showing time, can you put it in your showing instructions? No. All right. Can you put a sign writer on the sign? Yes. Yeah. What about, can you leave a sign or put it in your marketing materials in the house? Yes. What about your own personal website? Yes. Yep. On social media?
Yes.
Okay, there you go. So I got it. Is there any questions on what we can do and what we can't do? Hang on a second to get a microphone there.
When we're updating the website on KV Core that comes with our subscription to Samson, is there someone who can show us how to do the compensation, where that would go? Can that be part of a training in the future?
I'll talk to them on KV Core and Lofty because there's people doing both on that. So yes, I can definitely do that.
So on one final thing on B. So again, what it is that's purely the seller is authorizing us to disclose seller's willingness. In and of itself, that doesn't have anything to do with a specific amount. And so C is optional. That's why the form is called optional, right? But I just wanted to say that B, I'm hoping that, the vast majority of the cases, of course, the seller is going to check authorizes, yes, right, in B.
So Mike?
Yep.
What?
Oh, hold on a second.
So this is based on the buyer's broker agreement, right? Now there's nothing in writing as to what the seller's going to offer. This is a verbal conversation between you and the seller, the listing agent and the seller as to what he's offering, correct?
So,
okay. Can the seller ask to see the buyer's broker agreement when it's
That's not gonna
strictly
happen.
an agreement between the buyer
they can
and
ask,
his
but
broker,
there's not,
right?
I don't think you're going to see that, and buyer agents are not going to. All this B is doing, again, is if you don't have C, if the seller is not authorizing you to promote a specific amount, a percentage or flat fee, and all you're operating on is B, then all it says is you as the listing agent are authorized to say, yeah, we'll consider it, bring us an offer, right?
Well, consider it, but isn't the seller going to tell me a fee that he is no?
Not under B. That's next. C. Okay.
Yeah, and keep in mind. So
I want something in writing.
Oh, okay, you're not going to get it. So that's not going to happen in the new world. Is even if you called me. So wait a second. So even if you called me and said, Dave, you've got your listing over there. Is the seller offering anything? And my response would be is that hey, the seller will consider up to 2.5%. Because keep in mind that all the compensation is going to be negotiated within the sales contract.
Yeah.
So to your point, it sounds like you want, as a buyer agent, you want to have certainty that you're going to get paid.
No. As a listing agent, I want to know what the seller is willing to pay.
Right.
The addendum is the next one.
And I want it in writing.
Okay, we're getting to the next item.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I don't know why they took it out of the other one. Because it was in the July 1.
It was.
Yeah.
It was. And like I said, we agree. And I think that, just how these changes were made, 2 nights ago, we're going to see more. Did you want to touch on any there?
Just so for what it's worth, this is NVAR's explanation as to why they took it out. Removal of, quote, seller will pay language and predetermined blanks, the amounts or percentages, were removed because, one, there was confusion among agents about whether that was binding or not. And 2, seller may not determine an amount until participating in negotiations with the buyer. As part of the NAR settlement, remember, it's no longer broker to broker compensation. There's no contract created anymore, no binding unilateral offer of compensation or contract that's created between the listing broker and the buyer broker. Today it is still, but not after the 14th when compensation comes out. The new reality is that all compensation is going to be finalized, all buyer broker compensation will be finalized on page 1 of the contract. Okay?
Yeah, and we'll see in the front. I don't want to jump ahead, but even on the addendum, it's not guaranteed. It's like the seller is willing to pay. So keep in mind, it's just think real world, right? You can offer 3%, or the seller can say, hey, I'll give 3% for an acceptable offer, but all of a sudden the offer comes in $100,000 less. There's probably a good chance that they're looking at the bottom line of this.
And a lot of us listing agents, because it's our norm, it's what we're used to. Yes, majority of the time we probably want to know from our seller, by way of this addendum, what are you committing to pay? Because I don't want to mess around with my fellow buyer brokers. This is a cooperative experience. Takes 2 to tango. There's buyer and a seller, and so sorry. You know what? We can't have you talk. We can't have you talk without the microphone.
People online can't hear.
I have a question
Yes, go
about
ahead.
that. So does that mean now that when we go to settlement, the compensation is not going to show up on like the alta under just the seller, but it would show up on the buyer side and the seller side as 2 different ones? And how would that be transcribed to title?
It's okay. So yes, if some or all of the compensation to the buyer broker is being paid by the buyer, whether there's seller subsidy or not, it'll show on the buyer side as a charge to the buyer, right? I hope that answers your question. If any of the commission is not being paid
By the seller
out of seller sales proceeds, then it's going to show as a charge to the buyer. And that's not, most of you probably have never seen that, but some of you may have. In the commercial world, it's very, very common for buyer to pay their own broker. And in some deals in residential with investors, wholesale deals, whatever, it's very common for a buyer to pay their own agent's commission.
Yeah. Yeah, so you're going to see it different ways. If it was all paid by the seller, like if the seller agreed, then it would be on his side. So that's great. I think we had one more question, and we've got to move on. Bibbs, is there a mic or somewhere?
So in a buyer compensation, let's say we put like 2% and then seller offering 4%. Can I make an amendment?
To your buyer agreement?
Yeah.
Yes.
So
I would do it before you would submit the offer.
Got it. So it's vice versa. We can reduce, we can increase, we can make amendment, right?
Mm-hmm.
Got it. Thank you.
All right. So I'm just being cognizant of time. We'll be around for questions afterwards here too. Just within the contract, we just want to talk about.
Hang on a second.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
We still got to
we did see.
Got to go to C real quick and then go to the addendum.
No, perfect. Yep. The seller's approval of optional buyer broker compensation. In the event the seller desires the broker disclose and or market subject applicable to MLS rules and regulations and specific amount or rate for buyer's broker compensation, broker must obtain seller's approval in writing, advance of any such disclosure or marketing. Any agreement to pay or payment must specify the amount, rate of such disclosure. And that's going to be the disclosure we're going to go through in a minute.
So the key again here is a specific amount or rate. If that's what they are authorizing, they say, yes, I'm in agreement that I want you as my listing agent to let any other realtors know that we are offering up to 3%, whatever, 2.5%, whatever the amount is, that broker must obtain seller's approval on that in writing with this listing agreement, or certainly at any point in time before they ratify a contract. It says approval in writing in advance of any such disclosure or marketing. That means you guys putting that out there to people, that a certain percentage is available. Any agreement to pay, well, the contract's going to be an agreement to pay. The contract, page 1, 2E, obligates the seller to pay a specific amount. So what they're trying to tell us is, you know, even if you didn't start out with this addendum, this listing addendum, where the seller's agreeing to pay specific amount, optional specific amount to the buyer brokers, but then they change their mind, they want to do it as part of a purchase offer negotiation, they're asking us to get this before you ratify. It's just it's another safe harbor disclosure, really protect everybody, you know, in the light of the NAR settlement and the spirit and intent of the settlement, to have this as part of our listing agreement before you ratify a contract. Okay, and so then we move right to the
So
addendum.
there we go. So what's on the screen? This is the listing agreement addendum optional buyer broker compensation. So if you remember the old form, a lot of this was actually in the old form. They just moved it to the addendum. So
Yep. Yep, it's pretty much the same. 2 options. Seller is willing to pay buyer broker compensation up to the following amount, either a percentage of the gross price or a flat fee. So that's the checkbox with the blanks filled in, one or the other. I suppose it could be percentage plus a flat fee, but pretty rare. And then the checkbox for item 2, that they are expressly promoting or agreeing to us to make that known to the world, these specific amounts. Okay?
yeah, I think it's pretty clear, but is there any questions on this form?
And you know, they have their reason. They have certain reasons why they moved it off the main document, and you know, you can explore further the NVAR. You know, this is printed from a page. This is taken straight from the blog on NVAR.com, and I'm told that they're going to come out with a video, probably today or in the next few days. The attorneys at NVAR are going to have their own summary video of some of these changes as well. So keep an eye out for that. Before we leave the listing agreement, last thing I wanted to share with you is another pretty big change, is that the subsidy, seller paid subsidy, which was paragraph 8 as of July 1. We never had that in the past. They put it in July 1. Now they've taken it out. So there's no seller subsidy paragraph in the listing agreement that identifies a specific percentage or flat fee amount that the seller is telling us, hey, we're willing to do this. They took that out, but in MLS, as most of you should know, there is a relatively new seller subsidy field option. It's an optional seller subsidy. And in there, at a minimum, what I recommend that all listing agents do, based on discussion with their seller, is to check the box that says, effectively it says, seller will consider, it's negotiable, right? Seller subsidy. Seller will consider seller subsidy and authorizes broker to market it that way. That means in MLS, at a minimum, I recommend, why would you not? It's all negotiable in an offer, right? So if it helps make a deal, and by having that, I mean, we're not supposed to be talking about workarounds. DOJ is all over the workaround strategies, you know, that they don't want to see. And there's a lot of speculation out there, a lot of talk about whether listing agents were going to start using the subsidy field as a way to give a flag to buyer brokers that might equal buyer broker compensation, or take this to your buyer, there's a pot of money available, or potentially there's a pot of money So those are options. I just want to be clear. They took it out of the listing agreement itself, but it's always going to be negotiable. And as we see in the residential sales contract, just like always, there's a subsidy, a line for the buyer to include that. And subsidy from seller to buyer, again, can be used towards buyer's closing costs, and it can be used towards buyer's broker obligation on commission.
And remember that when you start talking about a seller subsidy, it all has to be approved by the lender. So there are some, maximums in certain loan programs and all of that. So once again, you want to have a close relationship with that lender when you're working this out. All right, so looking at time, we've got about 15 minutes here. How many people have seen this form? The MLS disclosures and residential seller landlord options. Hopefully everybody. So Mike and I have been talking that I don't think they named this form properly or correctly, because this is basically for all of our clients. And so whether we should be using this form now, we talked to Stephanie, it's going to be one of the forms they're looking for within compliance when they're reviewing your documentation. So the idea being is that whether you're working with a seller, a buyer, a landlord, we need to have this form. And basically what the form is in a nutshell is the first part is basically explaining what Bright MLS is and and how does it work.
And there's a link, there's a hyperlink there. I would encourage each of you, this is obviously going to our clients. And as Dave said, it goes to sellers, buyers, landlords, and tenants. It's supposed to go to every client. And so when you get your brokerage agreement signed, get this signed. Our compliance team is going to require it. But just so that you know what your people might see if they click on that link, that's a live link in the form when you see it online. It's worth reviewing what Bright has chosen to put on that public-facing disclosure page. And I think they did a pretty good job with it. By the way, one of the things that they did in there, which was something of an eye-opener, but really doesn't surprise me, and I can't argue with it, is there's a section on that page when you scroll down that kind of, it challenges the idea of the office exclusive. So for anybody who wants to, consider further, who does the office exclusive really benefit, and when and why, and should it be recommended or not? Public is going to see what Bright has to say right there. Okay.
Yeah, so just looking at this form, it was like, you're just going to check up top whether it's the seller or the buyer. Now, granted, the buyer, you're probably not going to have an address, so it's probably going to be like a TBD right now.
There probably should be landlord and tenant.
Yep.
It's just not there.
Yeah, you can tell in the headline there, it's seller landlord, and then it says seller buyer, and then further in the document it references tenant landlord. So
we believe it'll be updated before long.
Yeah.
And what did Stephanie Bryan say? What did we agree yesterday for rentals?
Yeah.
Our compliance, have patience with our wonderful staff, please. Our hardworking compliance people. Their heads are spinning a little bit. They've got a little bit of anxiety over what we're going to be requiring of them starting August 14th.
Yeah, we have 6 different jurisdictions and how many different MLSs, and each, just like, not everybody's on Bright, right? Richmond's on another one. Florida's on a lot, as you talked to Deb. So there's a lot down there. But just here, so if you're working, with your seller buyer client, you want to have them initial here in the middle of the page that acknowledge the understanding.
And again, that upper part, the gray part, is for any landlord, seller, buyer, or tenant. So all clients is the gray part, first top. So that's where they initial, whether they're a seller, a buyer, landlord, or tenant, they initial in the middle there. The bottom part is only for
sellers
or landlords.
Yeah, and so, I'm going to read off the first one there. It's like, when will your broker allow potential buyers, renters to learn about the property? And there's a date. And so, just within the listing agreement, we had dates, right? We talked about that. So, here you just need to work with them, but keep in mind, if it's an office exclusive, it's going to be on. In my opinion, I would probably fill this in as soon as possible, or right when you're taking the listing agreement, so you can start talking about it if we have the office exclusive and stuff.
That is redundant to the extent that it's the same as the listing term. So whatever you put in your listing agreement, and again, this half of the document only applies to sellers or landlords. That is the same. That is the listing term. So
yeah, and then pay real close attention to 2. Oh, is there a question? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Do we have this form?
Yeah, it is in SkySlope right now. By the way, there's a Bright MLS library in SkySlope as well. Stephanie Bryan and Mandana and the team of compliance folks are going to be working hard to make sure our checklists are properly set up for required documents, and this will be one of them. Okay, but it is in SkySlope. Also, if you go to Bright MLS, when you log into Bright MLS on your dashboard, the very first landing page, there's a tab for listings. Click that. There's a drop-down menu. These forms are there. The office exclusive form is there, and some other documents.
Yeah. So the next paragraph here, paragraph 2, and I love Todd and Rolf's rule in Tyson's that please read initial 1 of the following options. So their rule is that if you initial all 4, you owe them lunch. So I thought that was a good rule.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought that was good.
Works for me.
So yeah, so if you sign all 4 or initial all 4, we're going to have to pop it back. So so be real careful there. But once again, it's outlining the options again. Use Bright to share my home's information with the open market internet. Yes. B, I'm just going to hit the high points, and then Mike's going to update us too. 2B is use Bright to share my home's information with real estate professional and Bright MLS only, and do not publicly market my home on the internet. Internet, no. My home is ready for marketing, my home is ready for marketing, but will be ready for showings beginning on, fill it in, right? Whether it would be coming soon or active. And then I do not want my home on the open market, restrict marketing only to my broker's network. What would that be? There we go. Office exclusive.
Right. And again, this is obviously a little redundant. It mirrors what is in the marketing and MLS section of your listing agreement. So we didn't cover that part because this is really not new in terms of the listing agreement. It's just it's a new form, a new required form with some pretty important disclosures. So, question?
Yes.
So if I have a listing and they want to do all of the things, they want to start with market exclusive, then move to coming soon, then go active, what the heck do I put down on this form? What number do A, B, C, D, or E, or all?
No.
Just 1?
So which one?
Yeah.
I mean,
Please.
So one more time, tell me your time.
So my timing is the listing agreement is already signed.
So that's the listing agreement, period.
Yes. We planned to go live active September 5.
Mm-hmm.
But between now and then, I'd like to get them in market exclusive. I'd like to then go to coming soon and then go active by on or before September 5.
Okay.
So my opinion is you need to go with 2D because you're going to do an office exclusive. And then you can change. I mean, your listing agreement itself speaks to coming soon as well, right? Mm-hmm. But anytime you're going to be doing any marketing of the property in any way outside of MLS, that's an office exclusive.
Yeah, and remember the office exclusive form is separate from this. It also has dates and things within there. And so
I know it's crystal clear, right?
Yeah,
but
lots of dates. I would say when in doubt, though, just like Mike said, in that case there, I would definitely say it was 2D. It was the office exclusive. Make sure you've got the office exclusive form, and you can always change it.
Yeah,
there's a listing. There's an amendment form that we can change all these dates where you can extend or you can change back. It's going to be a lot of back and forth.
I know, I think I did it wrong.
I mean, but you respectfully, every listing agent has to ask themselves, what's the purpose of the office exclusive when it comes to advanced marketing? One of the big changes, not everybody knows this, and I don't think it's something that Bright or the realtor associations want to actively promote, and they're not actively promoting it, is that, remember, it used to be that an office exclusive could only be marketed in company. In our own company, on Samson Cardinal Nest message boards, the Samson Agent Facebook page, internally only. That's changed. And that is a result of the NAR lawsuit, that if it's an office exclusive, if you notice it says brokers network. It says
I think that's on the office exclusive form.
On the office exclusive form. But it doesn't mean that you should. What's the purpose? Okay, and that's a whole nother subject perhaps. We promote it in company as a listing tool, but always just remember that if you're going to do it, you're doing it for a reason based on discussion with your seller as to their benefit. And you need to really caution them and restrain yourself before ratifying a contract with anybody while you're an office exclusive. That's my opinion. Article 1 Code of Ethics should trump any other benefit that can be obtained from the office exclusive process. Meaning, even if you get offers from fellow Samson agents or anybody else, and now, yes, you can market it. You can market it anywhere, pretty much in your own network to other brokers, etc. It doesn't even any longer say you can't put a sign in the ground. Mm-hmm. And so it's controversial. The point being it's usually in the seller's, experience shows, the numbers show that it's usually in the seller's best interest to expose the property to the open market for at least that first weekend, to open it to the whole market, not just an office exclusive market. And so if you get buyers and they write offers, that's great. Got to have a serious conversation with your seller. Does the seller really want to ratify it? And sometimes they do. Obviously they do. They're like, you know what, that meets my needs. And I don't want anybody else coming through my house. They have the choice. And that's why Bright and the realtor associations had to walk back the restriction on the office exclusive, because it's the seller's choice. But it's ripe with abuse. And because our biggest problem continues to be lack of inventory. So the more office exclusives there are that never make it to market, at least as coming soon and or active for one weekend or whatever, that, in my opinion, that perpetuates the problem. So, my soapbox piece for today.
That's great. That's great. So yeah, but it could be cognizant of time, but just a few little notes, just a few little thoughts from the broker side is that when you are in SkySlope, make sure that you update your forms. If they're up top, there's usually a little button up there that you can say update. If you're using, if you've set all of these different, if you've saved your one little set of forms you've been using, make sure you've updated those forms. If you have templates and things like that in there. And, catch up with Stephanie. She does a great job with SkySlope if you've got any questions with that. But we are, like I said, we are seeing some old forms come through. And, so if it's version back, we're probably okay. But if it's 2 or 3, 4 versions, it's like, let's get this updated. So are there any other general questions before we close out? Johnny.
I'm just asking for a clarification. Briggs, you said you guys want to see a listing amendment with the seller agreeing to pay a specific seller agent compensation, even though on the residential sales contract, the buyers and sellers sign off and agree to a certain seller's agent compensation. Is that correct? Did I hear you correctly?
It's not us, guys. It's NVAR in keeping with this new document, and that new listing addendum, optional, where if the seller is telling us they want us to promote a specific amount, that form is needed. And that's in their determinations in keeping with the, the minutia and the spirit and intent of the settlement agreement. Yes, it's obviously going to end up in the contract, so why do we need it? If that's part of the question, why do we need to go through all this if it's ultimately going to be in the offer? And it is, and that's what's going to be controlling and binding. The listing side commission is not negotiable in the contract. Everybody be clear on that. Listing side is not affected. It's just the buyer broker side.
And from I'm sorry, go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, and remember that even if you come to me and I say, hey, my seller's willing to pay up to 2.5, that doesn't keep you from putting 3 in the contract. Right. Because once again, everything's negotiable.
Right. And from a strategic standpoint on the listing side, I don't really see a lot of advantages, especially if the home is priced properly, it's set up, and you're going to be successful. Why you would want to lock in a specific commission? You'd want to see what those offers look like,
Johnny. And you see this on some of the blogs, and some of the more consistent, productive listing agents are asking that fair question. It's like, what's in it for my seller? Why? Tell me why I should offer out a specific amount. Is that really in my client's best interest? That's a matter of opinion and a good discussion. It's a necessary discussion, obviously, between you and your seller, rather than just saying, we'll tell people we're open to anything, bring us your offer, right?
Well, and that came up in the mastermind we were all setting in, last week. The $10 million mastermind, it came up, and some of the people are like, hey, why should I put it out there that my seller is willing to pay up to 2.5 when maybe you get the contract through and they're only asking for 1 or 2?
And that's that's a reflection of the marketplace, right? I mean, if the market softens, you got to have that conversation with the seller that, or you should have it anyway, that, like it or not, some buyer agents and even some buyers aren't going to want to come. They might be gun shy from coming and taking a serious shot at your listing if they don't know what they're getting paid, or if they don't have a better indication of what they're getting paid.
Just offhand, do you know, for us shiny brand new agents, if the Sky Slope training that's online today reflects the new forms or still the old?
It's most likely it's going to be the ones from the last version, because like I said, we just got these and they haven't even put them out. As you can tell, we still have educational across us.
So if I master all of them, it's worthless next week.
Well, the majority of it's right there. I think we did a pretty good job of saying, hey, we removed this paragraph, but the majority of it's there.
And all the documents are viewable on NVAR.com.
And so keep in mind, SkySlope training is really teaching you how to use SkySlope. It's she's not pretending to be a broker to explain how to fill out the contracts. It's basically how to, get all your forms together and do it in an easy way. Dwight.
2 quick, easy questions. So in the case where the buyer's is not willing to pay, the seller's not willing to pay me, do we owe any ministerial duties to that buyer?
I guess what side are you talking about?
I'm a buyer. I'm representing the buyer, and the buyer says I'm not paying either.
You got a
Do we owe him anything?
But you got a brokerage agreement. You got to have a brokerage agreement.
Yeah,
right.
So do you have a number in there, or do you have 0 in there?
0.
And then you're
before they sign it, do I just want to know? Do I owe them anything?
Oh, before they sign the brokerage agreement?
Before they sign it, yeah.
Well, the agreement is what sets up the brokerage agreement and how you would. Okay. It's like, I think there's a real world. I think Donnie mentioned that the other day on the training too, is that there's Mike and I's answer from the broker standpoint, and then there's the real world that, if you go to the house and you talk about the agreement and all of that, it's like, okay, you're probably going to get in and start showing the house a little bit and talking, but I think that's a good point you've already brought up that this, I need to have something in writing just to protect both of us. And then if they start asking even more and more questions, it's like, I just can't answer those questions until, we have the agreement signed. And keep in mind, the agreement can be signed for just that house, that day, whatever. It's like, it doesn't have to be locked in for like a year. Did that answer your question? Or?
Well, yeah, I just wondered, they say, well, we don't want to pay anything either, do I just say, okay, thank you?
I mean, if they don't want to pay
Goodbye.
anything and they want you to work for free, then find another opportunity. It's easy for me to say, but why would you want to work with somebody that's not willing to understand your value?
But you can also have that conversation when you're sitting down with them that, hey, that it's like we can ask, but if they don't pay it, you still owe me X amount of percent or X amount of dollars or whatever, because I don't work for free, just like you don't work for free. And so, if we can't work it out to where the seller is willing to put it in part of the deal or a subsidy or whatever, then we've got to move on to the next house. But I would be real questionable that if somebody says they're not going to pay.
I want to touch on it real quick. It's not official or whatever, but a lot of you may have heard of touring agreements, asking questions like, is NVAR or the other local associations going to publish a one-page, easy peasy document that is designed to help facilitate the initial relationship, rather than forcing the buyer agency agreement in front of buyers the very first time you meet them out in the field? Just remember that in Virginia, the written brokerage agreement has always been needed. So in terms of legality in Virginia, it's nothing really new. That we've all been required to get a written brokerage agreement really early on. We fully understand, and the regulators understand, that it's hard to get a very serious, important, big transaction and relationship off the ground by trying to shove a 6-page exclusive right to represent buyer agreement in front of somebody the very first time you meet them. But people talk about the Zillow touring agreement that's floating around. You may hear about that. You may hear about an EXP, single-page buyer broker representation agreement. You may see or hear about some other companies coming up with their own. We haven't made any decision yet to create our own Samson Properties customized document, but we are certainly looking at it. My hope is that NVAR and Virginia Realtors, and then the associations across the river, GCAR, et cetera, will recognize that there's a demand. We're the members, we're the customers, paying our dues, and there is good reason to have a simple single-page document that, and for what it's worth, the Zillow one happens to be there's no fee. There is no fee, and you're agreeing to no fee, but it's the result of the NAR settlement component that requires realtor members like us to have something in writing before we show properties. Again, in Virginia, that's nothing new. We were supposed to have it. Didn't always happen. But in a lot of states, there was no such law, right? There was only 18 states, as I understand it, that required written buyer brokerage agreements. 18. Until now, and it's not so much license law at all. It's, in the case of Virginia, it was, but in these new states that are coming out with these new forms, it's because of the NAR settlement. And so all these people are like, oh, that's going to be a change in the way I do business, because I never get a buyer brokerage agreement before I show property. I always wait until I write an offer, right? Best practice is always going to be, whenever possible, be serious, show your seriousness, professionalism to the buyer client, get a buyer consult interview in person or via Zoom, whatever, whenever you possibly can. But for those occasions where you get a cold lead or something out of the blue, and they want you to meet them at a property, or you meet them at an open house and they want to write on it or whatever, there is benefit to a one-pager, and there is no such thing yet in NVAR library.
Yeah. But I think what we're coming around to is that you've got to have your talking points. You've got to have, why somebody should sign with me, and, what can you help and what can you provide them different from the other person. So we'll finish up with Dwight here. One more question. Yeah.
Can you explain the differences and clear up the differences between August 14th, August 17th, and then the coming date in October, November? What are the changes between there?
So the 14th is, as I understand, the 14th is the date that Bright MLS chose, which is 3 days before the NAR settlement requirement of the 17th of August to implement all the new practices. It's nothing more than that, Dwight, as far as I know. Bright decided, because they wanted everybody, it's kind of like NVAR came out with these forms July 1, which was a month and a half early. They didn't need to do that. They knew it was going to cause a lot of stress and all that, but they said we did it on purpose to get people used to it. I mean, in this case, the 14th is only 3 days, but that does open another subject. What about rewriting your brokerage agreements? Because people are going to ask that. Technically, we are supposed to get new listing agreements and new buyer agency agreements. If you have one now, if you're not under contract, if you're already under contract for purchase or sale, don't worry about it. And this is going to cause some friction with some people who they're like, I don't want to go back to my client. The relationship's a little rocky at the moment. To have to go back to them and say, I need you to sign a new brokerage agreement altogether. So, I mean, Sarah and Dave and I, and we talked about this with our manager group. Stay tuned for that. The best practice of what NAR and NVAR is telling us is do it, get it. It's all about transparency and disclosure, and what no time like the present, right? So you should be talking to your clients right now about what's going on, what's coming. Invite them to share with you if they've heard things that are of any concern to them. You could say you're opening a Pandora's box, and do I really want to go there? But I think you're doing a client service, professional service by talking about it. So, because if you don't get a new brokerage agreement that has the new language and stuff, which are directives that are important, we're operating at the direction of our clients. So if you don't have a new brokerage agreement, then we would have to be talking about doing an amendment, a brokerage representation agreement amendment, listing agreement amendment to modify. And that's a can of worms of its own, right? Practice law without a license and that sort of thing. That last date you referenced, I think, is the court approval date in November. That's when this whole thing is supposed to be finalized, and we'll see if it is. It's still not, it's like I said, there's no law. It's no new law, not yet. Court hasn't finalized it.
All right.
So.
Okay. Well, guys, want to thank everybody for coming out. Really appreciate it. Hopefully we did a good job filling in for Steve today. So I want to thank Mike. So as always, your managers, we're available. You're not on an island. You're not alone. So please come to training. Please talk to your managers. Please talk to us, and we're here to help. So thank you guys very much.
Right.